A saw-till. Till the cows come home. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to my shop, which you may have noticed now has a new feature behind me, and I am in love with this. I've been waiting for one of these for a long time. This has been on my list for years, and it's finally here, and I am very happy. I have made a saw-till, and I really want to go through this. It is a very simple design. It is something that it's not complicated at all, and anyone can do this very quickly. For me, it's taken like 10 to 12 hours worth of work. It's not that difficult of a task. And it goes through a bunch of different things. Half lap joinery, simple butt joinery, dovetails, even some dowel joinery in here for a little bit extra strength. It's a really kind of a cool system designed to hang on French cleats or whatever you'd like. And I will have plans for this on my website. If you'd like to see that, I have a link to that down below. So let's actually dive into this and take a look at the project. I'm going to do something very different on this. On this project, I'm actually going to do planning and design work. So I'm starting by measuring out all of my saws, their thickness, what the average width of one is, basically how far apart the saw kerfs have to be so I can fit most of them in there and how big this needs to be. And then I'm going to take all that data over to the computer and draw up a design for it and work from that design. So that was kind of an interesting and different thing to do. Now I have that, I can start working on laying out all of the boards. One side effect of working with a design is that I've got to use this weird tool called a tape measure and marking things out according to the cut plan. Oh well. After laying out all of the cuts I need to do, we can start doing the cross cutting and ripping things to their rough dimension. That's one of the things I love about this buck saw. It makes these cuts very quick and very simple. Then we can joint out the edges and get them ready for ripping them down to their finished width. It's good to joint out the edge, start in the middle, and then get a solid curl from one end to the other, and that way you can make a marking gauge line off of that jointed edge, and that will tell you where to cut. Now on this particular piece, I'm going to cut in a little bit from either end, and you can see the diagonal line I have drawn between those two cuts. And that diagonal line will be the separation between these two side pieces. So rather than cutting two of these diagonals, I'm just going to cut them as one big piece, one less cut to make, and I get to save on a board, and I keep these angles from the two side pieces the same. So fairly straightforward, just takes a little bit of pre-planning in order to make that happen. Next thing I want to do is make the T-braces that go from side to side. These will eventually have slits cut in them so that I can put the saws in them and they will rest in them. So I need to glue on this 1-inch piece onto the 1x3s that will basically create a T. I can use the vise to clamp them mostly, and then use these screw clamps to hold them in place, let them sit in that. I find myself using the vices quite often to actually do clamping work. They're good at that. Now back to these two side panels, I want to put a bar all the way through between them so that the saws will then rest on that 3/4 inch dowel. So I'll drill through both until the hole pokes out the far side, flip the board over, use that poked hole to center the auger, and then pop out. This gives a very clean entry and exit point on both boards, and you're left with a hole that you can be proud of. Now this will be hung on French cleats. As you can see the cleats on my wall, and I have a previous video on hanging those up, creating them by hand. And so I need to create a matching cleat to hang on those. And rather than ripping them like I did in the other video, I decided to plane them down because I had them pre-ripped to length. And I have this scrap that was cut off of the other French cleats to make sure I can match up the angle, and then lets me know where I need to cut a little bit more. That way I can make sure whatever that angle is, which I don't care about, I can make it work. Then we can cut everything to length. I want all of the French cleats, the T-braces, the rod, the bottom plate, I want them all to be the exact same length so that this box ends up being the same length. After that, we can start cutting all of the kerfs that the saws will fit into. And basically I put marks all the way down these at 1-inch intervals. The 1 inch is about as close together as you want the saws to be. Now for the panel saws and hand saws, I want it to be a very wide kerf, so I'm using the buck saw. And then for all of the back saws, Japanese saws, I want the kerf to be a little bit thinner. so I'm using a panel saw. The difference in kerf is basically I'm getting a slightly wider kerf than the saw, so that the saw will slide into those kerfs nice and easily. Now let's get on to doing some dovetails. The bottom plate of this will be attached to the two sides with dovetails. I've done several videos in the past on how to make dovetails by hand, how to make them faster, and a lot more information that I really want to go into in this video. Dovetails really scare a lot of people, but once you get into hand tools, they are really easy. Here I'm cutting the tails, and I'm just holding my saw at that angle. I don't care what that angle is. I do not have a line on my side of the board I'm following. I'm just cutting at that angle, and it really doesn't matter. So I like to have them fast and loose, and they become a lot more fun. Once I have all the tails cut, I can then chop down and remove the waste, then line up the tails onto the pin board, and basically rinse and repeat, do the same thing over. When I stack them up like this, it makes it just a little bit faster, so I can gang cut them and clean them out. So you're doing the same movement repetitively. It's just one way to save a little bit of time. As hand tools, you're always looking for a way to save it. Next thing I want to do is attach the T-braces to the side panels. Now I have marks at the height that they are at, so that I have them both at the same height on both side panels. But then each panel I'm going to line up on that mark and then mark out precisely where it is, so that I'm making a cut to fit that particular T at that junction. So each of the junction points are going to be slightly different. Next up, I can put the side panels into the vise and cross-cut down to basically cut out that shape of the T. Once I have all four cuts down, I can come in with a chisel, aiming high so that I'm not going to be blowing out the bottom, and I can break out the majority of the chips or blocks. In this case, I came really close to the line, but oh well. Then you can slowly pare down to the line and clean out to give yourself a really nice, clean, smooth bottom. And do that on all 3 points, and you'll have basically this T shape that the T-brace can fit into. With a little bit of work, bevel down, you can clean that out and bring it right down to your marking gauge line and get a really nice, clean, tight fit. Next up, we're going to get everything ready for the glue up, because everything has been cut to shape and size. So I'm going to be coming through with the smoothing plane. I have this set up very tight. I have a whole video on how to set up a smoothing plane. The mouth is small, the chip breaker is very close to the tip, the blade is really sharp, and I'm taking off as fine a shaving as I can and still get full width. Once that's all done, we can start doing the glue up. First, I'll start by putting in the dowel on one side, and then I can drive in the pins into that same side. For the second side, because it's up so high, I'm going to put it down on the floor and then put the plate on. Line up the pins and then fit the dowel into the hole and basically slide this side down onto those. And a little bit of wiggling, hopefully it's good and tight. You can use a little bit of brute force and violent manipulation to bring it exactly where you need it to be. After that, we can put in the T-braces and clamp it up. Give it a test shot. Now it is sitting on the bench and kind of functional. And I'm very pleased with how it came out. Ends up holding all my saws and having a little bit of space for the future. Once the glue has dried, we can take off the clamps, and this is where the fun really starts to happen, when it all comes together. You may hear in the background I'm listening to Shannon Rogers. I am one of his apprentices, which is a really cool program. Definitely take a look at that, but he's doing his monthly office time where we can ask him any question we want. Next thing I want to do is smooth out all the sides. Anything that's sticking up higher than the side, I'm going to use my low angle jack to clean off the end grain, and then come at it with the smoothing plane and give it its final touch before finish. And this will be the very last thing to touch the wood before I apply the finish. I love this part when everything comes together. I often just put on a podcast in the background and take my time and do it well, because spending time on this will make everything else really good. The very last thing before finish is attaching the French cleats. And I will pre-drill out a hole and put a screw in through the back. The reason I'm putting a screw in through the back on these is I don't know in the future, am I going to be moving my French cleats? Am I going to be adjusting them? So I'd really like to keep these brackets adjustable so that I can move them anywhere they need to be. So 2 screws per end, and a brace will drive a screw in really nicely. And one last addition I decided to add just before closing it up is putting a dowel in the top here. This is kind of superfluous if someone else doesn't want it. You don't have to have it. but this is a great place for me to then hang my coping saw and fret saw. So I have one more thing I can use in the space. And now boiled linseed oil and paste wax. And here is where the happiness happens. I love this part. A good traditional boiled linseed oil finish. I have videos on how I do my finish with boiled linseed oil and paste wax, even how to make your own boiled linseed oil. So if you want to see those, definitely go take a look and search them up. But I love the way it brings out the color in this white oak. It really just, it brings the whole thing to life. And this is where the project really has a lot of fun. And there you can see, all the saws fit. I have the coping saw and fret saw on top, and I am very, very happy. There you have it. I'm really, really happy for this, and as you can see, I have a lot more room to expand, and I have more saws that I'm going to restore, as well as a couple of these I still have to restore. And so I'm intending to have, I have enough space in here for 12 full-size saws, and then another 14 smaller saws, or I can change that any way I want. Also have this peg up here for hanging the coping or fret saws. And then I thought about putting drawers down here originally, but then I thought, you know, what's the purpose of a drawer? I'd rather just be able to quickly grab something and go. So I have this shelf here. I may put a lip on the front in the future. I'm going to see if that causes any issue. But as this is really solid and is not going to be moving around, I don't know if I need a lip on here. So that's why I didn't put one on here. So in here I have my saw sets, saw files, the covers for the blades that I don't need because they're on here, but I just like to still keep them around. So I keep them in there. And then I can also put all of my Japanese saws on here, or I can hang them up on. I really like how this came out. I'm really, really pleased. And again, I do have the plans for this on my website, so if you'd like to see that, you can go pick them up there. So that's about it. I really hope you like this. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are really the reason why I can keep putting out videos like this. If you would like to find out more about that or help out, you can do so right down here. Also, if you would like to subscribe or like the video, you can do that as well. And I do want to tell you about a podcast that I, Johnny Brook, and ZH Fabrication all have together. We record every Thursday live on the YouTube channel right here. If you'd like to follow along, go ahead and do that. That's about it for today. Until next time, have a wonderful day.